Max Verstappen was purely dominant at this weekend's Bahrain, winning by an astonishing 22 seconds ahead of his teammate Sergio Perez and extending his consecutive victories to 8 in a row, now closing in on the record he broke last year. But whilst Max was untouched out front, there was plenty of other talking points throughout the race, such as Carlos Sainz's charge onto the podium and of course the RB team order controversies leading to tensions igniting between Ricciardo and Tsunoda. First, let's start off with Verstappen's victory, which had all really started on Saturday as he took pole position for the main race. What it seems again so far is the Red Bull looks least dominant on qualifying day, so again Verstappen had his work cut out for him. Funnily enough, Leclerc's Q2 lap, which put him a provisional P1, was actually quick enough for pole position, but both Ferraris weren't able to hook it up in Q3 and failed to really improve on their first runs. Perez also failed to put pressure on Verstappen, qualifying his usual 3 to 4 tenths behind him, whilst Norris bottled turns 1 and turn 2 and took himself out of contention for the front row, which meant Verstappen was the only one that actually really executed in Q3 when it mattered, and as such, he was on pole position for the race. Verstappen's main challenge he faced during the Grand Prix was just the run down to turn 1 and the start itself, but he managed to get a great start ahead of Leclerc and just hugged the inside line, defended the inside line, and was able to keep his lead through turns 1 and 2, and from then on he was completely untouchable, winning again by an astonishing 22 seconds and just managing his race the entire time. And now, moving on to what I would consider to be the most exciting part of the Grand Prix, the RB team orders controversy that we had. So, I'll give you guys some backstory to this. Tsunoda and Ricciardo were on different strategies at the end of the Grand Prix, as Ricciardo swapped to softs for his final stop, whilst Tsunoda, on the other hand, went for new hard tyres. Ricciardo slowly closed the 4.5 second gap to Tsunoda over a period of around 15 laps or so, and with about 8 or 9 laps to go, he had caught the DRS train, which consisted of Tsunoda in 13th and Magnussen in 12th. Tsunoda himself had actually been catching Magnussen slowly over the past couple laps whilst Ricciardo was catching him and was in the DRS of Magnussen by the time Ricciardo got into Yuki's DRS. A couple of laps went past when Tsunoda was trying to make a move on Magnussen and Ricciardo was just sitting behind in the DRS. And on lap 52, Tsunoda and Ricciardo were both told that there would be a team order swap on this lap. Tsunoda refused the swap initially, but eventually relented, and on lap 53 he let Ricciardo pass to attack Magnussen ahead. However, for the remaining laps of the Grand Prix, Tsunoda kept voicing his frustrations to the team through the radio, saying things like, "Yeah, thanks guys, I appreciate it," and "he's too slow," in reference to Ricciardo ahead. Ricciardo did fail to get past Magnussen and ended up in 13th, while Tsunoda finished behind him in 14th. But the most surprising part of this entire incident has to be the incident on the cooldown lap, where Ricciardo was dive bombed by Tsunoda into turn 8, and then on the exit they both came really close to making contact, which led to Ricciardo calling Tsunoda an effing helmet. As you can imagine, this was an incredibly messy situation for both drivers and of course the team, and I think RB could have handled this situation in so much better of a way. You can understand Tsunoda's frustration as he was within DRS of Magnussen and he was clearly shaping for a move. However, as Ricciardo stated in his post-race interview, this situation had been discussed beforehand as they thought Ricciardo would be swapping onto the softs while Tsunoda would be going onto the hards. So Tsunoda shouldn't have been surprised by this team order. At that stage, you just have to kind of accept the team order, and if you disagree with it, you just have to let it simmer for the moment and talk about it post-race instead of wasting the team's time and your teammates' time. However, Yuki's dive bomb on the cooldown lap just is completely unacceptable and still shows the level of immaturity that still exists within Tsunoda. He has every right to be frustrated with the team as he's a racing driver and of course he wants to fight for every position there is. But there's no need to dive bomb your teammate in a cooldown lap. On a cooldown lap, you're not even racing anymore at this stage just to vent and show his frustration. It's just completely unacceptable and something that should not be happening. Ultimately though, I don't think you can really be blaming any driver in this situation, and it just comes down to the team RB as they needed to manage this situation better and communicate with both drivers what was happening. If it had been orchestrated quicker, perhaps Ricciardo could have got past Tsunoda earlier, his tyres would have been fresher and he would have actually been able to get past Magnussen, and I would argue that the laps he got stuck behind Tsunoda ultimately cost him that chance at getting past Magnussen. I also saw some comments suggesting that Ricciardo should have let Tsunoda back past, and the explanation from this is RB didn't tell him to let Tsunoda back past at all. I'm of the opinion they definitely should have got on the radio to Ricciardo and told him to let Tsunoda back past, as I think that's what's fair given he couldn't get past Magnussen. But again, this comes back to the team. The team has to be providing this clear communication. They didn't, and I think that's what led to this situation in the first place. To me, though, the most amusing part of this situation is that it occurred over a 12th place finish. They weren't even fighting for a points finish at this stage. And as Ricciardo said in his post-race interview, this really just doesn't matter. He doesn't care about a position like this. So how this escalated is just so amusing to me over basically nothing at this stage. There's a long season ahead. It was the first race of the season. There's no need to get into petty squabbles like this. But, of course, let me know your thoughts on this situation below. Now, moving on to the top 10 finishes, you of course have Verstappen finishing P1, an outstanding race from him. And then Perez had a really solid race finishing P2, and I think he achieved exactly what Red Bull wants him to achieve. Finishing P2 and not really challenging Max at all, but not getting challenged by the cars behind. I think Sainz had one of his best races of his career today, finishing in P3 on the rostrum, and he had some class overtakes throughout on Russell and Leclerc, and he outperformed Leclerc significantly over the course of the race with regards to tyre wear management. Leclerc always seemed to be struggling with his front lockups. I'm not sure if there's a mechanical explanation from that, but he also suffered from rear tyre deg a lot more than Sainz, so Sainz did an outstanding job preserving his tyres to a much better extent than Leclerc did. It's a good start to the season for Sainz, as he needed one given he's out of contract at the end of this year. Of course, he's getting replaced by Hamilton at Ferrari next year, so he needs to put on a good showing, especially in this important year for him contract-wise. Leclerc had a solid race in P4, but ultimately just wasn't as quick as Sainz throughout the race. He did beat him on quali pace, but with the points are handed out, he just wasn't as quick as Sainz this weekend. You then have Russell, Hamilton, Norris, and Piastri, who I all think were pretty anonymous throughout the race. Of course, Russell was more important early on as he jumped Leclerc, but especially the final three I named there, they were just pretty anonymous. They were finished within 2 seconds of each other, but again, not much happened for them throughout the race. Finally, you have both Aston Martins rounding out the top 10. It was a strong race from Alonso. He didn't make any mistakes, but I just don't think that Aston really had the pace of the other top 4 teams. And of course, Lance Stroll actually, I think, had an amazing race driving from last basically through the field after being backwards at turn 1 on the first lap to finishing in the points to get a point for Aston Martin. I'd also give a strong shout out to Zhou for finishing 11th. Of course, there's no points handed out for 11th, but it's a good start to the season and hopefully he can build on this momentum. He's out of contract at the end of this year and I think it's a make or break season going forward for him. Finally, I think this race also highlights how difficult it will be for the midfield teams to get points this year, given how strong the top 5 teams are in terms of pace and reliability. We didn't have any DNFs throughout the race this year, so it's going to really be up to the teams to capitalise, like RB, Williams, Haas, Alpine if they're in the mix, and of course Sauber, to really capitalise on those opportunities when a top team may or may be struggling. They might have an incident. You've really got to be there to capitalise, because I don't think these opportunities will present themselves often. Overall, the Bahrain Grand Prix, whilst there was some action in it, I don't think it was a good race by any means. I'm probably being optimistic here, giving it 2.5 out of 5 stars, a bang on average race. There were some bits that were noteworthy. The start was interesting, but all in all, Verstappen just cleared off for the entire race, and there wasn't much racing going on at the front. The battles between Leclerc, Russell, and Sainz were interesting to watch, but again, they weren't really for first. Hopefully, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix next weekend will be more interesting. Hopefully, Verstappen might get challenged. Hopefully, the pace of the Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, Aston are a bit quicker to the Red Bull on race pace, but I think I'm being optimistic here. Red Bull just look incredibly so strong, specifically on race pace. And of course, a reminder that the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix is on Saturday night again. But let me know what you would rate the race out of 5 stars and have an amazing day.